Let's say the United States needs money. Instead of issuing their own United States notes backed by their own credit, they issue treasury bonds. They then sell these bonds to the Federal Reserve, which buys them with money they created out of thin air. The money that the Fed created then goes to the U.S. The U.S. then pays interest on the money that the Fed lent to the Treasury. So to clarify, the Fed creates money from nothing, loans that money to the U.S., and then charges interest on that money. What this means is that there is never and will never be enough money in circulation or in existence to pay back that debt. We as a country, as well as private citizens, are forever enslaved by debt with no way of ever paying it off. Now, when the Federal Reserve buys bonds on Wall Street, the major financial firms that have been selected as dealers deposit the proceeds at their own banks. Fed rules require banks to keep 10% of their deposits in reserves, but the bank is free to issue loans equal to the remaining 90%. Let's say the Federal Reserve buys a $1,000 bond. After putting away 10% into their reserves, they are then able to loan out 90%, or $900. Since the original $1,000 is still on deposit, the $900 in loan proceeds is more new money, money created out of nothing. A total of $1,900 of new money is now available in the economy. Now the person that took the $900 loan spends that money. The payee then deposits the $900 into their bank account, and once again, reserves and deposits increase. This process goes on until that original $1,000 bond, which was created from nothing, becomes $10,000, making this one full-fledged debt machine while also devaluing the dollar. The more money that is out in the economy, the more the value decreases. There's no wonder that since the implementation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the dollar has lost over 95% of its value. The US dollar will eventually be destroyed due to an overwhelming financial crisis, and a globalist-run monetary authority will come along to save the day. And much like the Fed pretends that its goal is to prevent another Great Depression, the global currency will pledge to prevent another financial crisis, thus putting more power into the hands of a few and enslaving humanity that much more. That's the way of the U.S. government. Just like Benjamin Franklin said, if you sacrifice your liberty for security, then you're a patriot. Or something like that. We didn't know, we never will. Maybe it's not.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video about the Fed. There is a public bank problem, and Miss Ellen Brown thinks she has the public bank solution. She just wrote a wonderful book a couple years ago called The Public Bank Solution. Look at it right here. You can take a peek at it. Ellen Brown is the founder of the Public Banking Institute and the author of a dozen books and hundreds of articles. She developed her research skills as an attorney practicing civil litigation in L.A. In the best-selling book, Web of Debt, she turned those skills to an analysis of the Federal Reserve and the Money Trust. And now she's with us here. So let's welcome Miss Ellen Brown. Welcome.
Thanks. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great for having you on the show. Thank you very much for being here. So give me a little insight. What got you on this journey against public banks, or at least trying to improve public banks?
Well, actually, I only intended to write a book, but it seemed to hit a nerve, and then I wound up writing another book. I first had written, well, I'm an attorney by trade. My ex-husband burned out on Beverly Hills Law and went to go in the Forest Service, so that we were abroad for 11 years, so that gave me a chance to write. And this is a long story, but anyway, so I wrote on health and the politics of health. And at first I was just intrigued by the whole phenomenon of the internet and the fact that you could actually write text and move the footnotes around, and move paragraphs around, and the footnotes would follow with them. At first it was just the technology was so interesting. And then I wrote 10 books with like doctors, and then I wrote on a cancer healer in Tijuana who was arrested and taken to Brownsville, Texas, and tried for the fraud of alleging he had a a high rate of success with cancer, which he actually did, but you can't say that if you're not an MD, it seems. So I was on his legal team and wrote a book about that, which got me into a lot of sort of conspiracy theory type things. And then I discovered that The Wizard of Oz was actually written as a monetary allegory in the 1890s, so that gave me a hook to write on our money system and what was wrong with it, where our money comes from and where it should come from, how it got usurped. The power to create money is usurped by private banks, and people don't even realize it. That people think that all their money comes from the government, but it doesn't. Very little of our money is issued by the government. The rest is issued by banks when they make loans. So it's all credits and debits. And the one problem is that there's always more money owed back than they actually create in the process of making loans. So you have this continual imperative for growth. You have to keep finding more and more profits to pay off this debt. In other words, the debt always grows faster than productivity and the money supply itself.
We hear that.
Yeah, so that's why now we're in a situation where everybody's in debt. I mean, how could that be? Who are they in debt to? All the countries are in debt, and all the businesses are in debt. Of course, there are some very wealthy people too who are siphoning it all off, and they largely get their power again from this power to create money. So that was all just very interesting to me. So I wrote it up as a story, as a book woven around this theme of the Wizard of Oz being a monetary allegory, where in 1894 it was the first ever march on Washington, and it was such a remarkable thing. There was this populist movement where they marched all the way from Ohio to Washington, D.C., seeking to get the Congress to issue greenbacks or government-issued money the way Abraham Lincoln had done in the 1860s, and the way the American colonists did. I mean, that was our original money system, was the colonists issued the money, not the banks. They failed, but it was something new and different, and it made the newspapers. And so that was actually the plot line for The Wizard of Oz. And there was this very strong,
interesting.
Yeah, there's this very strong populist movement in the 1890s to change the money system and to get the government to take back the power to create money.
Now, is it fair to say that the Federal Reserve or the public bank concept began with a J.P. Morgan incident?
Sorry, say that again?
Is it fair to say that the public banking system, as well as the Federal Reserve, was kind of the impetus for their creation, was the J.P. Morgan incident when he came in to save the economy?
Well, that was the impetus for the Federal Reserve. I don't know if I would call that a public bank. It's actually composed of 12 branches, all of which are 100% owned by the private banks in their district. But yes, it was set up, all through the 19th century. So we have this money system where banks are allowed to lend far more money than they actually have. In the 19th century, it was the fractional reserve gold system, where they would keep a certain amount of gold and issue these paper receipts, and the receipt entitled you to claim the gold. But they knew that people only came for their gold 10% of the time on average, so they were able to issue 10 times as many paper receipts as they actually had gold, and then they charged interest on all those, issued them as loans. But they would periodically miscalculate, or people would get suspicious, and there would be runs on the banks. Like on average, once every 6 years, there was a major banking crisis in the U.S. all through the 19th century, and that was why there was a major depression in the last half of the century after they quit issuing greenbacks and demonetized silver, so it was only gold that was the basis of our official money system. So you would have wave after wave after wave of these bank crises, and there was a particularly large one in 1907, which some people say was actually arranged by J.P. Morgan because they wanted to set up this central banking system, which would allow them to backstop the banks. So they pooled. J.P. Morgan stepped in and got gold from England, probably the Rothschilds, and saved the day in 1907. So the Federal Reserve was supposed to be this backstop that would be government backed and government owned. But at that time it was still gold. I mean, they just had to pool the gold there at the Federal Reserve, and so we still wound up with the biggest bank run ever in 1929. And so the solution to that was to go off the gold standard, and then you had the Federal Reserve as a central bank that was authorized to just issue the money directly, which they've been doing ever since.
That's what Ron Paul likes to call the fiat money.
Yes.
So let me ask you this. Do you see any similarities between that populist movement, as you mentioned earlier, in the late 1800s, as well as now with Bernie Sanders?
Yes. In fact, I just read an article on that Bernie Sanders himself did not expect to do as well as he is doing. And it's the same with Jeremy Corbyn in England, that there just is... Yeah. That's the mentality right now. And there's the Syriza party in Greece. Of course, they failed. They were beaten back, but they dared to break away and defy the banking system and oppose austerity. And then you have similar parties in Spain and Portugal. So it seems to me that the temperament right now is that we had the big bailout in 2008, which shocked everybody. I mean, never been done before, and everybody's saying, they bailed out the banks. Why didn't they bail out the people? But we were willing to give them, let them try their system. They said, oh, well, we'll just get these banks back on their feet. Everything will be fine, but it isn't fine. People are still, we have a silent depression going on where you don't see the people in the streets. I mean, you do. You see homeless people, but I mean, you don't see bread lines in the streets. But they're just more discreet. Now it's food stamps. All these people that are on food stamps. But there's many people, according to John Williams, shadow statistics. There is many people now unemployed as there were during the Great Depression.
Oh, really?
So people are, if you count the people who have quit looking, they manipulate the statistics. But if you count all the people who would take a job if they could find one, but they've given up, then you still come up to something like 25%.
Oh, you're talking about the labor participation rate being so low.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a big challenge. So this is fascinating. So Bernie Sanders does resonate with that movement. It's going to be really fascinating how he does in the upcoming primaries in New Hampshire and South Carolina. I'm fascinated to see about that. But what can you give us one or two ideas or solutions that you propose in your book?
Well, in the public bank solution, my solution would be that we should have state-owned banks on the model of the Bank of North Dakota. In North Dakota, which has our one and only state-owned bank, by law, all of the revenues of the state are deposited in the Bank of North Dakota, and then the bank does what all banks do. They leverage their capital through their deposits into loans. So they don't actually. The Bank of North Dakota doesn't make loans directly for the most part. They partner with the local banks, so they don't compete with the local banks. It's like the local banks are the front office, and they find the good loans, and then the Bank of North Dakota comes in and shares and participates in the loan, helps with capital requirements, or they guarantee the loan, so they don't need capital requirements, and do a number of things that keep North Dakota independent so that it doesn't have to rely on Wall Street. And North Dakota has had the lowest unemployment rate in the country for a long time, long before they had an oil boom. They were the only state that escaped the credit crisis in 2008 and 2009.
Really?
They never went in the red. Yeah, they were always in the black. In fact, they had such a nice surplus. It was one of the issues in their legislature what to do with the money. Should they raise lower taxes, or should they add more services? I mean, nobody else in the country was in that position. Everybody else was scrambling, trying to figure out how to stay afloat. And they have one of the lowest foreclosure rates in the country, the lowest default rate on credit card debt and student debt. And this is and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a year ago, November, that said that the Bank of North Dakota is more profitable than J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs.
Oh, really?
Well, the article said it was because of oil, but here's the thing: in the last year and a half, oil has plummeted, and all sorts of companies have gone bankrupt. And yet, in 2015, the Bank of North Dakota had its best year ever. I mean, it's banner profits. So it's really its business model. The business model is just more efficient. They don't pay bonuses, fees, and commissions. The interest goes back to the public, for public use. And they don't gamble in derivatives, so they haven't gotten in trouble. And they don't have any high-paid CEO. The highest-paid person is the president, who gets something like a quarter of like $250,000 a year, or $260 maybe. But that's the president, compared to $20 million, I think, for the president of Wells Fargo.
Jamie Dimon, yes.
Yeah, they don't have it. They just don't have all these profits being siphoned off to the 1% or the 0.01% or whatever.
Do you know if Bernie Sanders has advocated something like this?
Well, what he has advocated are postal banks, which we used to have right up till 1967, where you have all these post offices that are struggling to keep afloat, and they're closing post offices out in rural areas, and those areas already don't have banks, and if they don't have post offices, that's sort of like a hub of the community.
Sure.
That have been around for as long as the country's been around. So we want to keep those alive, and globally, most countries have postal banks where you can do banking at your post office, just basic things, deposits. And these are things that 25% of the population in the U.S. is either unbanked or underbanked. They don't have bank accounts, or they hardly have access to bank accounts.
25%?
They're paying really high fees, like to write checks or for payday loans, that kind of stuff.
25% high. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the postal banks would be serving a market that Wall Street is not serving. So it's not like they're going to be competing with. Wall Street shouldn't even really care. Except you wonder, the reason the postal service is in trouble is because of this law passed like a decade ago that said that they had to fund health care for their employees 75 years into the future, which is they're funding health care for employees that aren't even born yet, and nobody else has to do that. I mean, it looks so outrageous that it looks like somebody's trying to force the privatization of the post office. So there are roadblocks to this idea of postal banking, but it just makes so much practical sense. Of course we should do it. It'll save the post office, and it'll save those local community, and it'll provide banking for local communities, and it really won't compete with any. But I mean, there's really no downside. It's all upside.
That's fascinating. Never even heard of that concept, the postal banking system. I haven't heard Bernie mention that yet. Fascinating conversation. I hope he brings that up in his next town hall meeting. Maybe he's watching, or somebody on his campaign is watching.
Yeah, well, he's mentioned it, but I think they don't. You don't really know what Donald Trump's position is on Wall Street. I think they don't really say
Donald Trump?
because they don't want to get. They don't want to tip off the big guns until they're actually there. Maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a whole different can of worms with Donald Trump. We're not sure what he's up to on that. What do you think about, we got a few minutes left, what do you think about the gold standard concept by Rand Paul? And I think Ted Cruz advocates it too, but I can't remember.
Well, I don't think, you can't go back to gold. It's we went off it for a reason. It was because, the banks got in trouble all the time, all through the 19th century because of it. and we tried to have a global gold standard, even when we were domestically off gold. You know, it was the official currency globally for balancing, settling trades. And we had to go off that standard in 1971 under Richard Nixon because we just ran out of gold. I mean, money is not a thing. It's not a limited thing and limited supply. It's a flow. And so there's much to be said for, they call it fiat currency, but it's really all of our money today is credits and debits, and that's all it is. And you want to keep that flow going. You want it to be expandable as necessary. And if you're limited to a certain amount of gold, you'll inevitably run out of it unless you allow, you know, something like digital gold or something that's just sort of a phony gold, and then you've blown the whole idea of having a fixed. I mean, I don't think we should have a fixed money supply. Money should ebb and flow in the same way that the economy does.
Excellent idea. I wish we had more time, Ellen. This is a fascinating conversation. I wanted to still get into the International Monetary Fund, China, and the whole works. We just don't have time. Once again, everybody, this is Ellen Brown, the author of a fabulous new book, Public Bank Solution. So, Ellen, where can we find more information about you and what you're up to?
My website is ellenbrown.com, and the Public Banking Institute's website is publicbankinginstitute.org. And then my books are available on Amazon.
On Amazon.com, Public Bank Solution, a fascinating read, everybody. That's ellenbrown.com. You can also find Public Banking Institute. Great sources, very fascinating stories.